February 2, 1959. The Ural Mountains of Soviet Russia. 9 experienced hikers set up camp on a remote mountain slope they called Kholat Syakhl, the Mountain of the Dead. None of them would leave that mountain alive. What happened that night remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. A mystery so disturbing that the Soviet government sealed the case files for decades. A mystery that still haunts investigators today. This is the story of the Dyatlov Pass incident. Igor Dyatlov was 23 years old, a skilled engineer and experienced hiker. He led a group of 9 students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnical Institute on a winter expedition. The plan was simple: trek through the northern Urals, reach Mount Otorten, return as heroes. They were all experienced. Grade 2 hikers, the highest certification in the Soviet Union. They had the best equipment. They knew the dangers of winter in the mountains. On January 27th, they began their journey. At first, everything went according to plan. One member, Yuri Yudin, fell ill early in the trek. He turned back on January 28th. The rest continued without him. Yuri Yudin would be the only survivor. The group was supposed to send a telegram when they reached the village of Vizhay on February 12th. The date came and went. No telegram. No contact. At first, no one was concerned. Delays were common in winter expeditions. But as days turned into weeks, families began to panic. On February 20th, search parties were finally organized. What they found would haunt them forever. On February 26th, searchers discovered the group's abandoned tent on the slope of Kholat Syakhl. It had been cut open from the inside, violently, as if the hikers had been desperate to escape. Inside the tent, everything was left behind. Food, warm clothes, boots. Their supplies were neatly arranged, as if they had been settling in for the night. But the hikers were gone. Footprints led away from the tent, down the slope toward the tree line. The searchers followed them. What they saw made no sense. The footprints belonged to people in socks. Some were barefoot, in -40-degree temperatures, walking calmly, in single file, away from their only shelter. At the edge of the forest, under a large cedar tree, they found the first 2 bodies. Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko, both barefoot, both wearing only underwear, frozen to death. The cedar tree above them had branches broken off up to 5 meters high, as if someone had climbed it desperately, trying to see something, trying to watch something back at the tent. Investigators found the remnants of a small fire near the bodies, but it had barely been used. Why would they start a fire and then not stay by it? Over the next few months, they found the other 7 bodies. Igor Dyatlov's body was found next, several hundred meters from the cedar tree. He was heading back toward the tent. Frozen in the snow, one hand raised as if shielding his face. Zinaida Kolmogorova was found nearby, also heading back to the tent. She had fought to survive. Her hands were bloody from clawing at the frozen ground. Rustam Slobodin was close to them. He had a fractured skull. But the injury wasn't fatal. He too had been trying to crawl back up the slope. 3 people trying to return to the tent. Why? What had changed? What made them think it was safe to go back? But the real horror was still waiting in the forest. The last 4 bodies weren't found until May, when the snow finally melted. They were in a ravine, 7 to 5 meters from the cedar tree, buried under 4 meters of snow. These 4 had made it further than the others. They had even built a rough shelter from branches and torn clothing. But the condition of their bodies defied explanation. Ludmila Dubinina was found with massive chest trauma. Her ribs were fractured. The force required would be equivalent to a severe car crash. But there were no external wounds. No bruising. Just internal devastation. Her tongue was missing, cut out or torn from her mouth. Alexander Zolotaryov had similar chest injuries. Ribs shattered. Internal organs crushed. Again, no external wounds. Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles had catastrophic skull damage. His skull was fractured with such force that it had deformed. Forensic experts said no human could deliver such a blow. The 4th body, Alexander Kolevatov, had missing eyes and a damaged neck. The medical examiner who performed the autopsies wrote something chilling in his report. He said the injuries were caused by an unknown compelling force. The damage was consistent with a high-speed car crash or an explosion. But there were no signs of external trauma. No cuts. No bruises. Whatever killed them had crushed them from the inside. The Soviet investigators considered every possibility. Avalanche. Animal attack. Infighting among the group. Hypothermia-induced madness. None of it fit the evidence. An avalanche couldn't explain why they cut their way out of the tent. Why they walked, not ran, down the slope. Why only 4 had severe injuries while the others froze to death. Animals couldn't cause internal injuries without external wounds. And no animal would make experienced hikers abandon their shelter. But there was something else. Something the Soviet government tried to suppress. Some of the clothing worn by the victims was found to be radioactive, significantly above normal background levels. Witnesses reported strange lights in the sky that night. Orange spheres floating above the mountains. Multiple independent groups saw them. One of the last photos on a camera found at the scene showed something unclear. Lights in the darkness. Something the hikers had photographed before they died. The Soviet authorities closed the case in May 1959. Their conclusion? Compelling natural force unknown to the investigators. The case files were sealed and sent to a secret archive. For decades, the area was closed to hikers and researchers. Forbidden territory. But the mystery never died. In 2019, 60 years later, the Russian government reopened the investigation. Using modern forensic techniques. Analyzing every detail. Their conclusion? Avalanche. The official statement said a small snowslide had created panic. The hikers fled. Some were caught by a second slide in the ravine. Case closed. But experts immediately challenged this. The slope wasn't steep enough for an avalanche. The tent was still standing when found. An avalanche would have buried everything. And it still didn't explain the radiation. The lights in the sky. The missing tongue and eyes. The impossible internal injuries. So what really happened on the Mountain of the Dead? Some believe it was a military accident. Secret weapons testing in the area. Perhaps the hikers saw something they shouldn't have. Perhaps they were caught in a shockwave from a classified experiment. Others point to the indigenous Monsi people's warnings. They called that mountain cursed. Evil. A place where spirits dwelled. Perhaps the hikers disturbed something ancient. Something that didn't want to be found. The most disturbing theory comes from the evidence itself. The way they left the tent. Calmly. Deliberately. Not running from danger but walking towards something. The way they climbed the tree to watch. As if monitoring a threat back at the camp. The way 3 of them tried to return. Only after hours had passed. As if waiting for something to leave. What if they weren't running from something outside the tent? What if something was inside the tent? What if they cut their way out because opening the flaps wasn't safe? One investigator noted that several of the victims had severe foam hemorrhaging from their mouths. A sign of extreme fear. Terror so intense it causes physical trauma. What could terrify 9 experienced hikers so badly that they would rather freeze to death than return to their shelter? The last photograph on Krivonischenko's camera, frame number 34, has been analyzed countless times. It shows streaks of light. Overexposed. Taken in a hurry. Taken at night. What were they photographing? What did they see in the darkness that made them raise a camera instead of running? Yuri Yudin, the only survivor, spent the rest of his life haunted by guilt. He died in 2013, never knowing what killed his friends. In his final interviews, he said something chilling. He said that sometimes he was grateful he got sick. That turning back saved him from whatever was waiting on that mountain. But he also said he had nightmares. Dreams where his friends were calling to him from the darkness. Begging him to come back. To understand what they saw. The tent, preserved as evidence, was eventually released to the families. Dyatlov's relatives found something the investigators had missed. Scratched into the fabric on the inside of the tent. Words. Barely visible. Written in fingernail marks. They are here. Today, experienced hikers still trek to Dyatlov Pass. Some report strange feelings of being watched. Electronics malfunction. Compasses spin wildly. Some hear voices in the wind. The indigenous Monsi people still refuse to go near the mountain of the dead. They say the spirits never left. That 9 more joined them in 1959. Scientists, skeptics, and investigators continue to debate. Rational explanations clash with impossible evidence. Every theory has holes. Every answer raises more questions. But perhaps the truth is simpler and more terrifying than any explanation. Perhaps 9 people saw something that night. Something so horrifying, so incomprehensible, that cutting through a tent and walking barefoot into the Siberian winter seemed like the safer choice. Perhaps they didn't die from cold or injury or avalanche. Perhaps they died from understanding something humans aren't meant to know. The case files remain partially classified. The Soviet government's full investigation has never been released. Whatever they found in those mountains, whatever they documented, stays locked away. And on cold February nights, when the wind howls through the Ural Mountains, some say you can still hear them. 9 voices calling out in the darkness. Still trying to warn us. Still trying to tell us what they saw on the mountain of the dead.